Emerging risks and emerging risk management. Welcome to the Risk Management of Everything channel. On this channel, you will find videos on risk management and the application of risk management to diverse areas and sectors. If you are new here, please consider subscribing to our channel and press the notification button so you can be notified when we upload new videos. Thank you. Emerging risks and emerging risk management are discussed in this video. Now, let us start. In a rapidly changing business environment characterized by advancing technology, shifting geopolitical tensions and increasing regulatory scrutiny, it is more important than ever for organizations to look beyond near-term threats to prepare for the risks they could face in the future. Broadly defined, these emerging risks are new or developing threats that have an unknown significance and impact and are therefore not well understood. Emerging risks can also be known as risks that have transformed due to changes in the business environment. The key is that, even if the risk is known to some degree, the likelihood and impact of the risk is not. These unknowns defy traditional risk management techniques and, as a result, organizations often opt to allocate fewer resources to them. But by taking steps to identify and evaluate emerging risks, organizations can be better equipped to make important, risk-aware decisions to ensure the best long-term strategic outcomes. For public and private institutions alike, a key ingredient for success is the ability to navigate a dynamic risk landscape, one that changes ever more rapidly and often materializes in unexpected ways. These changes modify known risks, create new ones and open opportunities for the insurance industry to reduce, mitigate and transfer risk. Globalization and deglobalization trends, fragmented value chains throughout the entire world, and the growing integration and interaction of digital systems are all drivers of increasing complexity. To protect their clients and themselves against undue uncertainties, insurers and reinsurers need to monitor the evolution of the risk landscape on a continuous basis. As a central part of their foresight activities, they need to scan the horizon for future risks. This entails the implementation of a broad-based enterprise risk management (ERM) framework, which includes the detection and assessment of emerging risks and thinking in scenarios. Definition of emerging risk. The International Risk Governance Council, IRGC, defines emerging risks as new risks or familiar risks that become apparent in new or unfamiliar conditions. Their sources can be natural or human, and often are both. Emerging risks may include new technologies, for example, artificial intelligence, AI, nanotechnology or genetic engineering, as well as economic, societal, environmental, regulatory or political change. While some emerging trends are developing at a slow pace, like demographic changes, societal preferences or cancer research, others can be fast-changing with disruptive potential, like the development of smartphones over the past decade, alternative currencies right now or AI in the future. Slow-moving emerging trends, too, may gain momentum quickly, for example, medical breakthroughs. For purposes of this video, an emerging risk is viewed as a new, novel, manifestation of risk, of a type that has never before been experienced. Novel manifestations of risk include entirely new risk types that have not existed previously. For example, it is possible that nanotechnology may represent an area of new, novel, risk. As such, it is worth noting here the double-sided nature of science and technology according to Beck and Giddens, 1990, which not only offers solutions to the problems and challenges of modern life but may contain sources of new, emerging, risk. In addition, novel manifestations of risk can also include hybrids which blend together known risk types in new ways, combinations, producing outcomes that have not been experienced previously. For example, it could be the case that zoonotic disease in the face of climate change, warming, may be an emerging risk. Although information needed to identify emerging risks may exist, can often be missed. It is this tendency to overlook, discount or ignore relevant information, including warning signals, which results in predictable surprises and partially explains why, following an extreme event, we often find ourselves wondering why we didn't see the event coming. Consequently, emerging risks are about unclear or changing framework conditions, such as regulatory developments or litigation trends. Thus, while we may think of emerging risks as being primarily entirely new risks, as is much the case with new technology, such as blockchain or the gene editing method CRISPR-3, some are known and familiar risks, but they become new or re-emerging as their contextual conditions change. A field like nanotechnology qualifies as an emerging risk, because some risks have been known for quite some time, but they haven't yet materialized fully. We, therefore, consider it a latent emerging risk. Some risks are changing their character dynamically. Consequently, they continue to count as emerging risks. The ever-evolving complex of cyber risks is a case in point. Usually, emerging risks are as of yet unquantified, even though they may have a high impact potential for reinsurers and for society. The lack of comprehensive data is one aspect of emerging risks' general nature. That's to say, they are mostly not yet fully understood or researched and might lead to surprises or shocks. Consequently, the early identification of potential changes to the risk landscape is important. In this context, scenario planning can be a helpful tool to discuss plausible future outcomes as a basis for risk dialogue, risk mitigation measures and business opportunities. To ensure the most encompassing risk culture for emerging risk detection and assessment, it is often necessary to conduct a broad dialogue involving different stakeholders. Since risk perception varies across geographies, cultures, societies and educational backgrounds, it is only sensible to involve a diverse group of individuals in the emerging risk identification process. Characteristics of emerging risks. Emerging risks may have one or more of the following characteristics. Large-scale events. Often arises from global trends. Often, beyond our capacity of control. Can cross geographic borders, industries, and sectors. Difficult to quantify the impact. Difficult to predict, and traditional risk management identification and assessment process may not work in managing emerging risks. Why emerging risks may be unknown. Not in all cases, but emerging risks may be unknown. Why? First, the extent or nature of the potential loss is not known. Second, there may be insufficient information. Third, the organization may not have the time, or take time, to fully analyze the risk. Emerging risks are unique in that they are differentiated primarily by the uncertainty about their potential probability and consequences. According to the International Risk Governance Council, IRGC, there are three major types of emerging risks to look for. 1. High uncertainty/lack of knowledge. Our lack of knowledge and experience with this type of emerging risk leaves us with uncertainty about how the risk may impact us and how it may interact with other known risks. These risks often arise from social or technological changes. The primary characteristic of these emerging risks is the lack of data or scientific knowledge regarding the possible impacts of the risk. Examples include nanotechnology, the sharing economy and sensor technology. 2. Growing complexity. Emerging interactions and systemic dependencies can lead to surprises. These risks emerge from new interactions and adaptive behaviors. The primary characteristic of these emerging risks is a deviation from known variability or a lack of awareness about how this risk interacts with other risks in a complex environment. These emerging risks can arise from the speed of innovation, changes in the regulatory environment and changes in the underlying drivers of risk. 3. Contextual changes. Emerging risks can also arise from known risks where the conditions or processes that are familiar to those risks change. The potential probabilities and impacts of these previously understood risks change as the context changes. The primary characteristic is unexpected impacts from the use of an established technology or process in an evolving environment. Examples include new materials being used in an existing product, regulatory changes or economic shifts. Emerging risk examples. One way to better understand emerging risks is to see common examples. Here are examples of emerging risks. Cybersecurity and cybercrime. Pandemics. Disruptive technology. Legislative and regulatory risks. IT systems. Talent and employees. Business operational failures. Competition. Natural catastrophes. Climate change. How to identify emerging risks. Effective risk management requires identifying emerging risks. Too often, risk assessments shuffle known knowns around on a risk or heat map, leaving executives and directors asking, "Can you tell me something I don't know?" While emerging risks may be more difficult to identify, and in some cases, impossible to identify, there are practical steps that we can take to identify some of these risks. Here are some suggestions. Perform risk workshops aimed specifically at identifying emerging risks. Use industry-specific emerging risk checklists. Ask stakeholders to tell you what you don't know. Focus on high-impact, low-probability events. Capture perspectives of industry and thought leaders. Perform scenario analysis. Consider cross-organizational impact and interdependencies. Key considerations. Emerging risks are newly developing risks that cannot yet be fully assessed but that could, in the future, affect the viability of an organization's strategy. One way to identify them is to focus on whether the critical assumptions underlying the strategy are becoming, or have become, invalid. The reality for every business is that its fundamentals eventually change. Using the critical assumptions underlying its strategy, management should identify relevant drivers to monitor the external environment for changes that could invalidate one or more of those assumptions. Another way to identify emerging risks is to pay attention to global trends. Earlier this year, the World Economic Forum, WEF, published its update on global risks. This study refers to a number of risks in 5 broad categories: economic, environmental, societal, geopolitical and technological. These categories are likely areas in which most of the external drivers impacting a company might be found. The WEF organizes the various risks under 2 broad global themes to illustrate their interconnectivity: economic disparity and global governance failures. Within these 2 themes, there are 3 key risks clusters listed below. 1. Macroeconomic imbalances. These risks arise from the tension between the increasing wealth and influence of emerging economies and the high debt levels of advanced economies. They include such risks as a financial crisis, asset price collapse and currency volatility, and are fueled by unsustainable savings and trade imbalances between and among nations. 2. The illegal economy. These risks arise from a networked world, governance failures and economic disparity. They include corruption, illicit trade, organized crime and fragile states. Growing illicit trade weakens states, threatens development and sustains political instability. 3. Water, food, energy. Growing population and prosperity are driving unsustainable pressure on global resources. With demand for vital resources increasing by 30 to 50% over the next 2 decades, shortages could drive extreme commodity price volatility and create social and political instability and, even worse, geopolitical conflict. These risk groupings provide insight into possible forces that could shape the future, forces some companies may not be thinking about today. The question is whether the organization is prepared to respond to the high-impact, high-persistence risks that might be spawned by these forces, such as another liquidity/credit crunch, a slowing Chinese economy, threats from new technologies or a catastrophic disruption of a critical region's infrastructure. Emerging risks are not just driven externally. They also emerge as a result of an organization's preemptive actions. For example, a decision to build new plants and hire people in a new market typically alters the entity's risk profile. Management must carefully consider the actual or anticipated effects of such actions, for example, exposure to political/sovereign risk, cultural issues, a different regulatory regime and catastrophic events. Scenarios are a useful tool for identifying emerging risks, provided worst-case scenarios are extreme enough. The extent of the interconnectivity of supply chains, business-to-business transactions and people-to-people interactions spawned by globalization, competition, technology, lean manufacturing and other drivers have not only increased the speed of business but have also raised the stakes of a crisis. The Japanese supply chain disruption highlighted a valuable lesson in this respect. When it comes to physical phenomena, for example, weather, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, flooding, arbitrary curtailments in the time period used to gather empirical data supporting decision models can create a false sense of security. Based on prior studies, the catastrophic Japanese tsunami was a 1,000-year event. Hurricane Katrina and the Australian flooding are other examples of worst-case catastrophes. Look back far enough because the geological clock is ticking. If a single-source supplier is in the wrong footprint when an extreme event occurs, there will be consequences for its customers if it lacks a well-thought-out response plan. The final point management should consider is the organization's game-changing risks. WEF includes several risks to watch due to their severe, unexpected or underappreciated consequences. These risks include cybersecurity, demographic changes, resource security, retrenchment from globalization, infrastructure fragility and fiscally distressed cities. While not all of these risks are relevant to a given company, some may be. Questions for boards. Following are some suggested questions that boards of directors may consider, based on the risks inherent in the entity's operations. 1. Is there anything management truly fears, and are those concerns out in the open? Does the organization consider interrelationships among risks to identify relevant risk themes? 2. Is the board apprised in a timely manner of significant changes in the enterprise's risk profile? Is there a process for identifying emerging risks? Does the exercise result in appropriate response plans? 3. Is the board satisfied that management is periodically monitoring changes in the business environment to identify potential impacts on the assumptions and risks inherent in the corporate strategy? How to manage emerging risks. Some people ignore emerging risks. Why? Well, because of a natural bias. Individuals are busy and don't want to think about things that have a remote possibility of occurring. However, a little discipline can go a long way. Consider which of the emerging risks or combinations of risk have a decent chance of occurring. Add these risks to your risk register. Finally, assign the risk owners and ask them to develop response plans including contingency plans and fallback plans. Additional risk mitigation steps include enhancing resilience through business continuity planning, diversification, and collaboration. Lastly, organizations should routinely identify and assess emerging risks and continuously devise strategies for both monitoring and managing these risks. In managing emerging risks, here are some key questions an organization should consider. 1. What emerging risks are relevant for us? Is the impact significant? What is the time span, short-term, medium-term, long-term, that we foresee? 2. What are the assumptions that are destabilized if the risk materializes? 3. What are the strategies for risk response? 4. How can we continuously monitor emerging risks? As a matter of fact, emerging risks are particularly important in the strategic planning process since it has a long-term time span. By focusing on trends that are slowly emerging, public entities can identify potential shifts in critical assumptions and develop or modify strategies to either minimize the negative effects or capitalize on the opportunities that an emerging risk may present. Incorporating the consideration of emerging risk in the strategic planning process can yield great benefits, such as having sufficient time to prepare. This is an opportunity for the risk management function to be a value-adding resource in the strategic planning process. Here are the steps involved in managing emerging risks. 1. Identify emerging risk exposure, As discussed above, it is essential for an organization to identify its emerging risk exposure. Here are valuable questions to identify an organization's emerging risk. What emerging risks are relevant for us? Is the impact significant? What is the time span, short term, medium term, long term, that we foresee? 2. Evaluating the impact. Once an emerging risk has been identified and assessed, it is time to evaluate its potential impact on an organization. Various techniques can aid in this regard, including scenario analysis, bow-tie diagram, and Delphi technique. 3. Monitoring the risk. Once an emerging risk has been identified and evaluated, it should be monitored. Key risk indicators, KRIs, are metrics related to risk exposure and demonstrate changes in the likelihood or impact of the risk occurring. KRI monitoring is often linked to an organization's risk appetite. 4. Developing a response plan. A preemptive response plan can reduce organizational vulnerability by modifying risks, prescribing action plans, and taking advantage of opportunities prior to experiencing potential effects. Plans are monitored through key risk indicators that can trigger escalation to appropriate persons when thresholds are reached. Thresholds can be tiered to respond as the emerging risk unfolds. Once these thresholds are triggered, the response plan strategy is executed. Response plans are purposefully proactive to react and adapt to changes in circumstances as they occur and build resilience for your organization. Response plans can cover a variety of areas such as changes to strategic plans or risk appetite, allocation or acquisition of capital, alternative available resources, roles and responsibilities for key people, partnerships. They may also include traditional risk management techniques such as risk transfer and risk control. 5. Integrating emerging risks into the known risk portfolio. Determining the point at which an emerging risk becomes a known risk may feel like more art than science. That said, it is worth the effort to try to pinpoint early warning indicators that signal whether a potential risk effect is turning into reality. Some risk signals are easier to perceive than others. For example, in the case of legislation, the trigger for the risk might be the passage of a bill. In contrast, risks related to cloud computing may have several indicators, such as the extent of data migration to third parties and increasing levels of cloud spend. If indicators exist, they should be leveraged to plan for the potential risk effect. Regardless of whether an emerging risk becomes a known risk through the presence of objective indicators or subjective determination, once it happens, the organization needs to prepare. The responsible risk owner can develop metrics and action plans, just as he or she does for other known risks. Sometimes, emerging risks and known risks converge. For example, consider the impact of an emerging risk such as changing labor laws overseas on outsourced operations. This emerging risk has the potential for disrupting the already known risks of market pricing and currency fluctuations. The combination may exacerbate volatility and/or create new vulnerabilities that also need to be considered. In such circumstances, it may be difficult to pinpoint a single risk owner. Instead, a cross-disciplinary response may be required. 6. Overcoming challenges. Developing an emerging risk capability can be challenging in and of itself. As such, it is important to adopt a test and learn philosophy at the onset. The risk management function should prepare leadership for the likelihood of new discoveries and course corrections along the way. Key challenges include the ostrich in the sand effect. Some emerging risks are perceived as so unlikely to occur that they are unworthy of consideration. To overcome this perception, it is helpful to cite instances of the risk impacting other organizations. No organization can be prepared for every conceivable emerging risk, especially as the rate of complexity continues to grow. The goal is to ensure that the company has focused its attention on high-impact, low-likelihood events, and strengthened its ability to respond generally in the face of such events. 2. Knowing when to escalate. For emerging risks that lack early warning signs, it is difficult to know when to sound the alarm. Do it too soon and you are crying wolf. Do it too late and you have lost your window to intervene. A good gut check is the following question: can this risk be adequately addressed by those in the know, or does it require senior level intervention to approve some course of action? If the former, then perhaps you want to highlight the risk, but not escalate it. This may seem like a subtle distinction, but in these kinds of conversations, tone matters. Offering senior leadership assurance that you have identified a risk, are addressing it and will keep them apprised, is likely to prompt a much different reaction than asking them to intervene during a developing crisis. 3. Lack of collaboration. Increasingly, emerging risk issues require an interdisciplinary response. For example, it is all but impossible to identify a single risk owner for cloud computing when, to varying degrees, the use of cloud computing may impact nearly every business unit in the organization. It is still important to empower a single leader, but that leader should be held accountable for developing a cross-functional team to respond to the issue. A key criterion for selecting the risk owner should be his or her ability to influence in the absence of direct authority and make sure that every voice is heard. 4. Knowing the unknown. It is often hard to imagine scenarios apart from the organization's day-to-day existence. To complement the views of internal subject matter experts, external sources, such as Gartner's quarterly Emerging Risks Report, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report and the Excellence in Risk Management survey from Rims and Marsh should be consulted to round out the list of potential trends. Conclusion. Emerging risks and emerging risk management have been discussed in this video. Although they are often unique, emerging risks can be identified, evaluated and monitored, and response plans can be implemented when they occur. Emerging risk identification and assessment creates a competitive advantage, helps future-proof longer-term strategies, minimizes unwanted surprises, and allows organizations to capitalize on opportunities. Understanding the potential impact assists in risk management strategies and may reveal opportunities for new revenue streams. Identifying and evaluating emerging risks empowers organizations to be forward-thinking, leading to increased readiness and resilience in the face of new and developing threats. Hope the video is educative and beneficial to you. Which aspect of emerging risks and management of emerging risks discussed in this video do you consider to be most applicable to your organization? Please post your answer to this question in the comment section below. If this video has been helpful and beneficial to you, then, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Thank you for watching the Risk Management of Everything videos. We love to hear from you. Please post your comments and questions in the comment section down below. If you are new here, please subscribe to our channel, Risk Management of Everything, and press the notification button so you can be notified when we upload new videos. Thank you.